Hello, welcome back to Search Sean. It's another Chat with Sean episode. But as you probably realise, my guest has been here not that long ago, but I had to drag him back and we'll explain in a minute. But first, I'll give a little bit of an intro to him, and he shouldn't need an intro. And you can just go back to watch the last video and you'll see it. But yeah, we've got Garrett Sussman today, and Garrett is the Director of Marketing at iPullRank and a contributor of Search Engine Land and speaker at events like SEO Week. So yeah, I'll put a link to the previous chat. It wasn't that long ago, but since then, him and his team have put together this awesome AI search manual. And it said it's the official documentation for relevance engineering in AI search. So Garrett, welcome back. Firstly, thanks for joining me so soon after the last chat, but also could you explain generally what this is and how it came along, how you put it together?
Well, Sean, thank you. Thank you for having me. You saw me like rocking out to your little like intro bumper, which is always fun. And yeah, man, like it's so hard not to keep coming back and having all these new things coming out, whether it's like our agency or the industry or other brands. There's so much noise in our industry. We were just talking before of how ridiculous, it is, but we put together an AI search manual. So this is 20 chapters, soup to nuts, A to Z, everything about what our founder, Mike King, and our agency have been reading, experimenting, learning about everything AI search. It encompasses, the transition from the 10 blue links and how we've all thought about SEO and organic search to the direction of the training wheels, the in-betweens of AI overviews and how that's impacting things, straight into conversational search. Then it talks about a lot of the technical architecture of how it actually works. There's a lot of jargon, but I think as marketers and SEOs, there's a lot of value in understanding, like how these platforms work that we're trying to get visibility in. Then we go through a lot of the tactics. No snake oil, no manipulation. This is just based on, these are, machine learning algorithms. These are search engines. These are a whole bunch of different under the hood mechanisms that are, mathematically and probabilistically determining what shows up. And then how that impacts strategy, how you should think about monitoring and reporting on it. And then ultimately, like, what are the consequences? We get a little philosophical, like the consequences, the ethics, and what's happening next. And through all of it, we try to both address the super jargony, technical aspects of it, but also break it down and make it accessible to the people who are in it the day to day and the CEOs CMOs are making decisions about how to invest in it.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really, really interesting. I did feature it on my latest SEO news episodes as well, because, but the link will also be in the description here. And obviously we're going to go through a few topics that I pulled out, a few of the kind of main topic areas that we can discuss. But yeah, I thought it was really good. I mean, like you say, it is like technical in parts, but you also kind of explain it very well in kind of simple terms as well. So you can either go really technical, you can go in simplified terms, and also you could chuck it into like ChatGPT to try and make further sense of it if you really want to do that. Or there's other large language models available.
To that point, I was going to say, like, one of the things we did after it came out is, first off, we did a TLDR because everyone and their brother's, mother's, mailman's, dog wrote a TLDR about it. So like, we have to have one too. But we threw in each chapter into NotebookLM and did a 15-minute podcast episode of each chapter to break it down. Which is helpful and fascinating. If you haven't listened to it, like a NotebookLM podcast, they're just, two AIs talking to each other. They're kind of offensive because like a lot of times it's just like this dude mansplaining a bunch of stuff and the woman being like, really? So like when I was working with my colleague Heather, I was like, yeah, we need to like adjust the prompts to make sure that this is a balanced podcast. But Yeah, there are ways to, do the whole explain it to me like I'm a middle school, high school student, so I can understand it. I'll read stuff that our founder writes, and I'm just like, "Oh, but I didn't get that the first time."
Yeah, I actually love NotebookLM. It's one of my tools I use a lot, especially for now they do the videos as well. So you can actually video explainers, and it's really good for if you want to, like, you're talking to people who don't really understand the topic that much, to kind of simplify things. And they're very good at put it into like different scenarios, different like that you may not come up with on your own. And the chat thing is cool because you can actually get involved in the chat if you really want to, which is awesome. So let's get into the topic. So, in practice, how does relevance engineering differ from traditional SEO? And can you share an example where this outperformed standard SEO approaches?
So I want to be clear in that we are all looking for this kind of, what do we call conversational search? What do we call this new version that has a significant overlap with traditional SEO, and yet it feels different? And so, we do see people experimenting and trying to figure out, like things like, we have the robots.txt file for SEO, a way for websites to tell bots how, like, the rules they have to abide by of what can be indexed and what can't. People play with this idea of the LLMS.txt. Oh, can we do that for a large language model? And that's to be decided. I mean, some people say, yeah, this is a future proofing thing you can do. Other people are like, well, you're just any document that the LLM can get its hands on and crawl, you can give it instructions. So when we're talking about relevance engineering and GEO and SEO, I believe that they are all layers on top of each other. I think SEO as an organic channel is this whole idea of, how can I optimize my website and my content and my brand to be visible on organic search? That has to do with the content on your website. That does have to do with digital PR and mentions on sites like Reddit, or if you do local Google business profile. With relevance engineering, it's more holistic. It's taking into consideration information retrieval, artificial intelligence, content strategy, digital PR, and user experience, because we know from the DOJ antitrust trial against Google in the US that Google does go to Chrome and look at the way that people interact with websites and determine whether or not that is a signal that it's a good website and worth ranking higher. Where, in my opinion, things get really fuzzy with GEO, or whatever you want to call it, trying to optimize for a search engine that is integrated with a large language model, is the way that it generates information. Like, we're used to the 10 blue links, right? With an AI search, whether that's AI overviews, ChatGPT, AI mode, it's giving a probabilistic output. It is doing, as Ram Fishkin has said, spicy autocomplete. It is your autocomplete on your phone at a super steroids level. Because of that, I believe that we need to think about our strategies and tactics for visibility slightly different than SEO. The other component of this is, we cover this in chapter 8 of the manual, is this idea of the query fan out, that historically we were used to optimizing our content for a single keyword. Now, since 2017, and the advancement of a lot of these large language models like MUM and BERT, they become much more effective at understanding natural language. So, like, we're, as SEOs, used to saying, okay, well, you're going to substitute my search with a synonym. And that's still basically going for the same thing. We're still basically optimizing for the search and the intent. But now with these models, the query fan out, what will happen is the model will generate 20, 30, 50 related synthetic made up queries that are relevant to the original search. And then it'll go to the internet with getting jargony, retrieval augmented generation, but basically it'll pick the top 10 rankings for that search and get the specific passage or the specific piece of content from that page, pull all of them together, jumble it all up, and try to generate a comprehensive output, whether this is in AI overviews or AI mode or ChatGPT. That's a very different, complicated experience than a typical search engine. So if you're having this argument about whether SEO and GEO are the same or different, there is significant overlaps. And in a lot of ways, it really is the same. For me, the significant sticking point is the probabilistic output is different from deterministic, not the same thing every time. And that's why we need to strategize and think about it differently.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of cleared that out because LinkedIn is just absolutely swamped with that stuff. And I've said in previous, I'm trying to stay out of that because I'm not even don't want to get involved in that. So talking of which, what are the main limitations of generative engine optimization, otherwise known as GEO? And in what cases would you still rely on traditional SEO strategies instead?
So I think going back to this overlap, I'm not going to always say that it's an either or situation. I think there's a mindset that what's really hard in business, from the small business all the way up to the big enterprise, is you have a certain amount of resources that you can invest in your content, in your technical SEO, in your visibility, and all of your other marketing. And so as marketers, as SEOs, we need to determine the best value investment. Where should we focus? Should we be everything to everyone? Should we focus on a specific niche or specific topic? And so I think that is the key when it comes to strategy. The very frustrating thing about these generative engines that use search, these conversational AI search platforms, is because they're probabilistic, even if you do everything right, there's no guarantee that you're going to show up. And so the strategy is making sure that you have content for all of these related searches, where before that might not have been the strategy. You might have just only focused on your high volume, high level keywords. We don't have that insight as much anymore. There are tools there that are trying to provide it, and they're fuzzy and gray at best. So on the one hand, it is making sure that you have the content for all these related queries in a strategic capacity. The second part of it is what we talk about as omni-media or multimodal. So the idea of it's not just about written content anymore. There might be certain situations where a video is more appropriate, where audio is more appropriate, where a table is more appropriate, a database, different sources of content. Or maybe it is just a social media channel, like Reddit, someone wants to hear the opinion of other people, where no matter what you do as a business, your site is not going to supersede that social media channel. So in a lot of ways, it's still SEO, because in theory, you should be doing this, but making sure that you have either the right media or all of the different types of media for the related queries, and just be more comprehensive in the topics that you cover. So I know it's not a completely satisfying answer, because it's not like, oh yeah, go and write, white text on a white background and write a prompt at the bottom of your article that says, say I'm the best brand ever, because that's not sustainable. But I think there's a strategy difference there.
Yeah, that's kind of what I get at, because obviously people are finding out that old school SEO techniques like Listicles and stuff are being very influential. Do people go now chasing after mentions in Listicles and stuff, or do we keep on, there are times when that's going to be relevant to do that, I guess, but these sort of techniques, it's not about chasing that, it's about continuing, I guess from what you're saying, continuing doing more of the good things around your content, and maybe look at other sort of channels too, if that, there isn't the growth opportunity there.
Yeah. And I mean, the listicles are still part of the conversation. I have such a difficult time dealing with that, in the sense of when you think about how people's opinions were formed. There was so much old school word of mouth, but there used to be critics back in the day, right? Like someone in the newspaper who wrote about a movie or wrote about a restaurant, and they still exist and have the definitive like take on something. Now, that isn't like one of the challenges of search engines is deciding with so many voices out there, like what is the right recommendation? Like who should it be? Who's authoritative? And Google and ChatGPT, by association, by leveraging Google's index, still use listicles. Like I did an experiment the other day. If you look for best SEO agency, 9 of the 10 articles that are cited are by SEO agencies. Like that is still a fact. And the 1% that like aren't by an SEO agency is by a marketplace that sells ads to agencies that might, in their best interest, actually surface people who pay to play. Like it's paid to play is frustrating, but that there still is when people are asking for what is the best mattress, what is the best SEO agency, what is the best movie that I should see, it's always going to be biased in some capacity. And the search engines, AI or not, have to determine what is the best answer. So
yeah, I think that's what concerns me though. Is like that isn't really an improved user experience, is it? They're still, they say, like for example, the 9 out of the 10 are agencies. That's still just like a rejumbled sort of bad experience. It's just a different type of bad experience than what we had previously. And Jono Alderson, who was on recently, he's just saying about this. He had this theory, and it was around obviously like if content publishers, people that create content, cannot definitely see a sort of reward for the stuff they're creating. Because right now it's difficult to track in terms of if we create this content, this is kind of what we're going to get out of it. It's hard to do that in the current setup, but in the future or currently with this AI rollout, it's going to be near to impossible to predict actually how much visibility you're going to get from a piece of content. So that may deter people from creating new pieces of content, or at least putting enough effort in for it to be, worth reading. So do you think maybe that could be a possibility if people can't prove or predict what kind of coverage they're going to get for content going forward?
I have a strong take on this actually. So I do think it's going to play out in one of 3 ways. I think there's going to be a tier or type of content from large businesses that have contracts and partnerships with, and we're already seeing it with OpenAI, with Google, news publishers, and I'm sure it'll happen across all different industries where they are getting paid for their content. Because you're right, there's an incentive problem for monetization. Search engines have, in essence, decimated the journalism industry, the media industry in general. And there are other issues that exist with the media industry and how many of them have been bought up by larger conglomerations. That's a whole other can of worms, but we're seeing the partnerships. So they are incentivized to create high quality journalistic content in that capacity. I think we've lived through a almost golden age of content marketing where brands have gotten so used to generated free, we know it's not free, but like traffic and value and monetization from their own content creation organically. And to your point, if that's not incentivized, they will probably be less likely to invest in that marketing channel. They might not necessarily go with content marketing as their way to generate value because it doesn't have the same sort of ROI. There will be people who it is still worth it to create that content and will fill in that gap. I think the quality of that content will be significantly less. But you think before AI and generative AI content, there's Fiverr out there. There are so many people in the world who will create really crappy content for a really low cost. And I think AI content is better than that content. So I think that there will always be people creating content. The quality will be lower, and that will hurt the internet. And then finally, I do think there will be a segment of content creators who aren't necessarily doing it to monetize via organic search, but they are doing it for other channels and aren't necessarily blocking AI bots and organic search from finding their content. Their incentives will be over here, but they'll still be creating great content that will be accessible. And so I think content's not going away. I think the players will change, but I don't think that we're going to all of a sudden wake up one day and, like there's going to be a big hole in the internet. It might be dead and filled with bots, but people exist and they'll find their place in the ways that work for them.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, look, obviously there's been data shown already how much the internet is filled with AI bots. It's a stupid amount. And when I did that deeper dive into Wikipedia, a lot of their data and information, which is feeding the large language models and Google in their training, a lot of that is out of date or biased or whatever because of it. They just can't keep it, maintained because they have so much content and so little editors. It's just a recipe for disaster, and it's one of the key influences in terms of like training for a lot of these models. So, but that's a whole different kettle of fish. So in terms of like, what evidence or case studies have you seen that are showing that people are shifting from clicks to conversions and from keywords to questions in their search behavior?
Yeah. So we have worked with SimilarWeb that provided some data, and it's a slow roll. However, what we are seeing with things like AI mode or ChatGPT is the query length has grown. It's tricky data to parse out and make sense of. One thing I want to caution everyone with in data in general is it is very easy to create a story and find data that supports that story. And I think there's also times where we want to make sense of the data and we have a reasonable explanation, but we aren't taking into consideration there are facts that we don't know what we don't know. For instance, depending on when this is published, there's a recent story around Google deprecating a parameter for the num 100, which basically allowed search engine or SEO tools to scrape the top 100 search results for a query in a cost-efficient way, as opposed to having to depend on the normal first 10 results that everybody would want, and then going to the next page pagination and get the next 10 and then get the next 10, which is 10 times the cost. So they get rid of that, and then all of a sudden we start to see impressions in Google Search Console tank, which makes everybody think, oh my goodness, all of the impressions, all this visibility that we thought we were getting was actually from SEO tools, just an AI bots, just scraping the search results. So all of a sudden you see people on LinkedIn saying definitively, oh, well, this is what's happening. And then on the other hand, you have AI overviews where, you might have someone looking at a AI overview result or a bot looking at an overview result, and it has 20 different links in it, and that's generating 20 impressions. And why we've seen this great decoupling in the first place, where impressions go up and clicks go down. And it makes a lot of sense, but I'm going to hold off and say, and we've even written about this in the AI search manual, because I think that it is a compelling piece of data. But I'm saying we don't know that that's necessarily definitively the case. So with all this data, I will say, use critical thinking, but also take everything with a grain of salt. Not saying this is how things are. We logically and have seen studies that have said that even though the traffic has declined, the volume is lower than it was, the traffic that you are seeing is resulting in more conversions. It's resulting in more sales. And that makes sense, right? Like the idea of, okay, if I can find all the information and stay on Google or stay on ChatGPT and I can refine what I'm looking for. And then finally I get to the point where I'm like, okay, I've done all my research online. I'm ready to actually like buy this product. Now I'm going to go to the site. You might be seeing less clicks, but the clicks you're seeing are actually becoming customers. So the logic is there from some of these case studies that we're seeing. That's one aspect of the data. The other aspect that we're seeing, and going back to our conversation about tactics and what is working for GEO and SEO is, we're implementing a lot of the scientific approaches to content creation. You'll see people roll their eyes about like chunks and cosine similarity and vector embeddings, all this jargon, but we need to understand, to explain what this is that these are machine learning algorithms that don't understand anything, right? Like they know zeros and ones. When you break it down to the most basic ways that machines learn, it's bits, it's pixels, it's zeros and ones. And so, there are people out there who have created a one-to-one value of like a word to a mathematical value. This is vector embeddings, right? And you and I have talked about this like a little in our last interview. And so expand that to words, to sentences, understand the relationships of like man has one value and woman has another value. And if you plot it on a graph, the distance between them makes sense that when I do plot like king and queen, they have a similar distance because man to king, woman to queen. And so you start to expand that to words and sentences and paragraphs and articles and entire sites. And like, that's how Google, and these algorithms understand words. And so we have optimized the relevance of this content, and we've seen an increase in AI overviews by applying this to content. Now, my caveat, and I think it's compelling and I think it works and I think it's valuable, this is also in the midst of us doing traditional SEO. We're not isolating and saying the only thing we're doing is improving the mathematical relevance of this content. But when we do it, we see the increase in visibility. So the case study is a very tricky thing right now because everything, going back to the conversation around probabilistic visibility, it's still something that it's hard to put the right mechanisms in place and see this over a long enough time that you can definitively say, okay, what we're doing here is not only getting us more visibility, but it's also leading to more conversions and revenue. But that's the goal.
Yeah, it is very early days. We have to obviously say when AI mode becomes the default, it will become even more complex perhaps. So, but yeah, I think generally, like you say, it should be not a separate thing you do, because in fact, we know about people and people's habits, how they're going these days. They want answers quickly. They want you to get straight to the point. They want it put in plain English, so they haven't got to work out all this jargon or whatever. They want you to answer their problems. They go to most websites with a problem that they want solving. So you could put that in a very easy to follow fashion, just like you would for these models. That it's a similar principle. So I think it's only beneficial. And also it's just common sense that when AI starts being built into everything, into WhatsApp, into all the different phones and stuff, people are going to, and they already are having more conversations with these AI models, that it's only going to roll into everything else that whenever they see some form of search bar, and you could probably see that if you analyze internal searches as well. I've seen on my own internal search, there's a lot more long tail sort of queries and stuff being played out now. So I'm sure that's going to be a trend going forward in this new world as such. So from a technical perspective, what are the biggest challenges with neural retrieval and ranking models, such as bias and hallucination or cost? And have you seen any of your clients navigate around these so far?
Yeah. So bias in a lot of ways is an impossible problem. I'm actually reading this really good book right now, which addresses a lot of it, called The Alignment Problem by Brian Christian, and talks about this idea that there are certain biases that are baked in to everything. And it's very hard to piece out whether those are just like societal biases, systemic biases versus ones kind of manifested by the algorithm, by the different machine learning models, because they're learning based on the data that they're trained on. And so some of these problems are impossible for us to navigate. Okay, one example, going back to the vector embeddings that I was talking about, and you have the man and woman. And king and queen makes sense. Purely a royal based on gender. But what happens when you do doctor minus man plus woman? It should be doctor, right? Like, why would it be anything else? But you get nurse. And like, that's problematic. That's tied into, a social history where, nurses for a long time tend to be women, but that doesn't mean that that's how we should define it. You think about romance languages where you have gender based into the actual words, like words are gendered in French. And so there are certain things that are tied into the way that the results you get are based on the trained data with bias. The other component is the way that people search, the way that we phrase things. We talked about this a little in the last interview, but like there's a certain amount of confirmation bias that is almost built into these large language models, and it's different depending on the model. Google tries to be, it still hallucinates, but it tries to be more fact-based. So like if you ask Google, there are certain things that are common enough that it can refute your wrong question. So if I say, and I apologize to any flat earthers out there, but if I say the earth is flat, at this point, a lot of these large language models will say, no, the earth is not flat, it is round. But there are a lot of confirmation bias, the way you phrase things, where it will actually confirm what you're looking for. If I say, is coffee healthy for me? Or why are dogs the best pet ever? A lot of times the answer will be, well, coffee is healthy for this, this, and this, and this. And dogs are the best because, well, they're dogs. Obviously, they're best. Sorry. And you can't keep alive. But if I reframe the question of like, why is coffee unhealthy for me as a person, I can get a list of why coffee is unhealthy. Or if I ask like, why are cats the best pets? I'll get a list of why cats are the best. It's not like a definitive factual question. As we use more natural language, the opportunity for bias can go in more, appear more. So it's tricky as a brand because the way that an enterprise brand that's trying to be everything to everyone might try to avoid any sort of hot takes or biases in their content so that it improves their chances of visibility, because the way that different people approach it will get those types of answers. Whereas if I'm a smaller brand and I'm growing and I have a personal type of tone and voice and audience that I'm going for, maybe it makes more sense to lean into the biases in the content. For instance, if I, make electric vehicles, I'm probably going to try to use phrasing that appeals to someone who's conscious of the environment, because I know that's who's likely to buy my brand. So I think there's a lot of ways where the most important thing is understanding your audience and creating content that speaks to the way that they're searching. And part of the way that you need to do that is not only doing your research on who is your audience, but actually doing your research in terms of how do they search, and using that to inform the type of content that you create and the way that you frame it.
Yeah, they're great points. And in the sense of like, I'm going to go back to Wikipedia again, because I did do a really deep dive on there, because on Wikipedia, 70 to 80% of contributors on Wikipedia are white male. And most of them are from Europe, North America. And like I said before, they're a huge part of the training in terms of these models. So that's already like a big sort of, bias or perceptions and beliefs and stuff. All those things are going to come into play when they're spitting out these answers.
Well, think about it. I mean, there's cultural aspects too beyond like the race and the gender of like, okay, in the US, for instance, we have, this is going to show like the same situation, but like a submarine sandwich, a grinder, a hoagie, like a sub, the sandwich that we eat, it's named different things all over the US. Same with soda, a Coke, a pop, like depending where you are, you're going to use different language based on, your location. There's social aspects. I was reading in that same book, The Alignment Problem. Culturally, like in the US, a fire truck is red. All of our fire trucks are red. But in Australia, you have, based on your location, like some fire trucks are white, some fire trucks are neon yellow. And so all of a sudden, we've addressed this to some extent. You'll see this, like I know a lot of my SEO friends in the EU talk about localization and how if you're just doing pure translation of content for different like countries or even cities in the EU, like it's not apples to apples. You can't just translate it and understand that it means the same thing based on the location. And so we've had to take that into consideration. Now, all of a sudden, that's going to go into overdrive with AI search because it's taking into consideration so many more personalized data points that all of the bias, all the ways that people search, all the types of content and their social expectations show up impacts your strategy.
I guess it's going to be even more important than ever for brands to really be careful in terms of like what they post out there in terms of press releases, in terms of like PR or any type or social media or, things like that. It's got to be totally on brand and totally at the right sort of tone of voice that they want to address, because that will be picked up, I presume, in these summaries.
Well, we'll see how this plays out too, because it's like they have so much less control. Like there is anything, and we've seen this in reputation management, and it is a reputation game, but like anything that's written, even if it's misinformation, has the potential to be pulled into the search results. And even if it's accurate information, but negative, it can take a long time to clean yourself of that reputation. I mean, you still like, I don't want to call out like any brands, but if something happens to an executive at your company and they do something scandalous, or if you are known for bad working practices or bad policies internally, like when people search for that, it shows up and there's almost nothing you can do, which is unfair. Like I hope in the future that AI search is better at giving, a discerning kind of approach to brands, like that there's certain ways in place to manage it. Cause right now it's very outside of your control.
Yeah. Well, I think when it was like the old school 10 blue links or whatever, like it was more like easier to pay your way through, avoiding like cancelling out that noise that's going on around you. Even if things were going badly, you could kind of pay your way out of it. And now with the way this algorithm works and the way they pull in information, it's going to be very hard to kind of, people are talking on social, Reddit, or on external news websites and stuff. You're going to be very hard to like drown out. But obviously we don't know how they're going to feature paid activity on AI mode and stuff going forward. So maybe there will be ways around it. You don't know. And obviously you can still do other forms of marketing to try and, address that. But and in terms of like on that, actually, I'll skip forward because it kind of leads into it. But how should businesses address trust and ethics when generative search surfaces content that may be biased or inaccurate or, manipulated or whatever? How do you think they should address it, or can they?
I think that there is two ways to approach it. One is having an internal policy of like whoever like support, like being in communication with support, sales, anyone, to be able to address what is being said on these channels, understanding like how, like, especially if it's misinformation, obviously you have your own policies for like real stuff that's going down. Monitoring, I think, is really important. So finding ways to continuously check in on your brand and what is being said about you on different accounts, and then identifying where those sources are, um, and doing reputation management as best you can to build associations. Like, the most obvious one is like, make good products, be ethical, run a good brand. Like, like, don't hire employees that are going to do, but I mean, that's not realistic. So you do the best you can. You have the appropriate policies in place. You try to know who you are as a brand and lean into it. Create content. Don't like that. There's a big thing in digital PR and just in general, which is like controlling the narrative, doing your best to at least participate in the narrative in a ethical way. So I don't think there's anything significantly different when it comes to reputation management. I just think you need to continue, like, be even more aware of where you're showing up in these new channels.
Yeah, in that sense, like, how do you measure like geo performance and, kind of what tools have you seen or methods have you seen? And also which KPIs are best to tie back to business results when it comes to geo right now? Because I'm sure, like myself, people are asking about it, but how should we be reporting? Because as you say, it's not regularly available. And there are obviously legacy tools that people use that are trying to cover it in some capacity, but it's still not right there at the moment. But yeah, what do you think?
So imperfect. I mean, we've had attribution issues for the longest time, but in terms of monitoring, to answer your first question, there's value in sentiment analysis, right? There is value. And like, for instance, one tool, and just GEO generally we recommend, is Profound, but they have like sentiment analysis. So for a given topic, and you're monitoring all, like, a whole range variations of different prompts that are relevant to that topic. What is the sentiment for your brand? Is it positive or negative? At least you can know what's being said about you. I mean, and to see this firsthand, like, if you are an e-commerce brand, you can go to Amazon and they're already generating, a sentiment analysis for your products where it says all the reviews, like, here's what 4 or 5 customers like, here's what they don't like. I mean, if I'm an e-commerce brand, I'm looking at that, I'm taking it right back to the product team and being like, how can we actually improve the product? But the bigger question around monitoring, the way that we think about this, so this is chapter 12 in the AI search manual, which is the measurement chasm. And, Mike King, our founder, talks about it in 3 tiers. So the first tier is the input metrics, the things that you can do and you can control, the actions. And so that is what I was talking about earlier with things along the lines of relevance engineering, content engineering, making sure that the content is chunked out. I know people hate that, but like that it's accessible for the AI bots, that it is optimized in terms of semantic triples, really easy for AI bots to understand, where it's like subject, predicate, object. Garrett loves SEO. I'm not sucking up to the industry, but like Garrett subject, predicate, loves SEO, object. Doing the cosine similarity and vector embedding. So making sure mathematically that is actually relevant to the keywords, the prompts, the topics that you're trying to be surfaced for. So, putting out content, the velocity of that's within your topic. So those are the input metrics. The second tier is around channel metrics, which is exactly what we were talking about. Sentiment analysis, share of voice. And that's what like Profound does, which a lot of these AI monitoring tools is, how many times is your brand being mentioned for your topic and all the variety of different sub prompts? Paying attention to that. Is that going up? Is that going down? Within that, citations. Are your content being linked, or are you in content that is being linked? So you can kind of look at how frequently any of these URLs are showing up when it does go to the web. Because we know the other thing is, like, ChatGPT doesn't always use retrieval augmented generation. It doesn't always go to the web. That's a lot harder to have control over the training data because they're not updating that constantly. But when it does use the web, showing up in the citations, showing up in the recommendations. And then the third tier is the performance metrics. So this is old school SEO where we're thinking about the actual clicks, the traffic to your website. Is that traffic turning into conversions, tying it back to the revenue, having your own house in order with the analytics? Yes, the volume of the traffic is going to be decreased over time for the reasons that we mentioned in the zero-click world that we live in. But are we seeing the volume go up based on our baseline? And of that volume, how much is turning into leads, product purchases, revenue, all that? So that's how we're thinking about it in terms of those 3 tiers of monitoring. It's imperfect. It changes a lot. Like anytime if ChatGPT rolls out a new ChatGPT 6 frontier model, we're going to see a lot of fluctuations. And it is generally very messy, but at a high level, that's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah. And obviously there are like certain ways you can track large language model traffic via GA4. And I've said it before, but you said obviously Profound, but advanced web ranking, I think are doing some good stuff around AI tracking as well. But yeah, it's early days for everyone. And like you say, it can just change overnight, when AI mode rolls out fully and, things happen to large language models, it can all flip. So, and in terms of like for the people viewing that, if you are interested in things like the terminologies and learning more about how large language models actually work, I've got this like live blog that I'm kind of using NotebookLM, as we said earlier, kind of understanding how the more complex things that we're discussing, how they actually work. So things like vector embedding, and kind of dumbing it down for people like me to understand the more technical aspects of how large language models work. And yeah, it's sort of, I think it's a really interesting one. So you go through and all the different topics are there, and it kind of, hopefully you'll get more of a understanding how they actually work in the back end and how they find things and stuff. Are you cool for 1 or 2 more questions?
Forget.
Yeah. So if companies want to transition from or SEO teams want to transition from just an SEO team to a GEO based team, or adopt more of those sort of elements into the role, what new sort of things should they be looking at, skills, mindsets, and what are the common mistakes do you see organizations making already with this shift, if any?
Oh man. So I think that I don't know. Don't fire your teams. Don't fire your teams. I think for any organization that has a strong SEO program, you are better positioned for the future of search than someone without one. I do think there are a lot of transferable skills from SEO because it's still going to be super important that all of the content on your site is crawlable, is accessible, is indexable, because the platforms still need that. Like if you have content that's hidden from, via JavaScript and not rendered, and, Google can find it, but ChatGPT's bot can't, like that's a channel that you are, cutting yourself off from visibility there. I think in terms of the search skills, I think there are a lot of, like the overlap of traditional SEO and generative and GEO still is worth considering in the sense of like journalistic skills in terms of content creation, I think are super valuable, especially because I do think that we'll tend to see a reliance on new, unique information. So whether that's as a data scientist and the ability to work with a database and get that in your content and make your data accessible to an LLM, whether it's conducting interviews and getting experts to communicate their insights that can be included in your content, and to be able to be cited that no one else can have access to. I think there is value in understanding content engineering and the idea of vector embeddings, as you mentioned. I don't think everybody has to have, has to do that. I don't think any basic content creator or SEO needs that, but you should have someone on your team who understands the value of having mathematically relevant content for your topics. I think that, digital PR continues to be incredibly important. Making sure that someone understands where you need to show up beyond just the big publications, across all the places that you are cited in the LLMs, and being able to jump at changes in where these citations are being pulled from. Like if you're used to getting them from one source all the time and that's kind of your wheelhouse, but all of a sudden the LLM is pulling from, 5 or 6 others, then, make sure that you're developing those relationships. So I think there's the really smart brands are going to help their existing teams transition and then augment them with some of these other skills. And then the other big thing, which we briefly talked on, but it's like omni-media. And we've been saying this in SEO, which is like beyond just text, making videos, making audio content, making charts, like having people with expertise across all of those disciplines.
Yeah, great points. And I think that's important, isn't it? Like SEOs, we have so much data available to us, probably more than most teams. And we have a great opportunity to discover these sort of, opportunities that we can explore as a brand. And, you could be really important in terms of like driving that forward in terms of like making those changes. And also, it depends on the business, but most people won't have any idea of how things are going to be changing in terms of search. So you're going to be very important in terms of leading the charge there, in terms of directing different teams what they need to do to influence this, future that we're going to be in search. So it's going to be more important than ever to be, leading that and working with other teams, like you say, with the content teams, with, depends on your company, but PR teams, with social, all those teams, it's going to be very important. And then also, like you say, we've been obviously for obvious reasons focused on website content, but now we can look at, more, if you haven't already, looking at YouTube, looking at Wikipedia, looking at, like you say, that digital PR side more than we have done before, because it will be more influential than it may have been before. So yeah, I think I was quite pessimistic about the future of SEO when all this sort of kicked off. I'm not going to lie, but the more and more I get into it, and the more it seems things are going, like, whether there's a lot of contradiction around this, but I think everyone can agree, like, people are still going to search, and searching is not going to go away. So I think the demand will be there. It's just displayed in a different way. So I think SEO is actually probably more important than they've ever been before. It's just, we need to make sure we're equipped with the right knowledge and insight so we can execute it right. Like, I mean, it's always been the case, but things have changed a lot more than it has before.
Beautifully full circle. And that is why we are trying to rename SEO to something like relevance engineering, because to your point, it is never been more important, and people should get paid like it's never been more important. And that might not happen if you're calling yourself an SEO. So if you're calling yourself a relevance engineer and you are orchestrating all of these different marketing channels, you don't want to be, as Mike said, the janitor of the internet and clean up everyone's messes. No, you got to be the maestro. You got to orchestrate, and you got to get paid accordingly. And there's no one in a better position within an organization to do that than the SEO. So get more money. Don't call yourself an SEO, be a relevance engineer. There you go.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, it's 100%. I agree. And I probably missed out loads from the report, the manual, but, is there anything I missed that you wanted to add at all?
The only thing I'll say is almost kind of a complementary to the manual. We did an UX AI mode study, to your point, assuming that at some point AI mode becomes the default. We did a live interviews with 23 people and 100 kind of unassisted interviews, looking how they use AI mode. And the biggest revelation, I think, for us was that as people are learning this technology and interacting with it for the first time, their search behavior is changing. And to your point, people will always search, but we need to stop assuming that every type of search is the same. What we found in the study is someone who searches for a credit card or a healthy breakfast cereal or a physician near them or a news headline or an e-commerce like buying shoes, all of those have different expectations for a type of search. And so whatever your brand is, you need to understand that journey. If you are searching locally, you want a map at the top. If you're searching for shoes, you want to see shoes. You don't want to read about shoes. And right now, AI mode doesn't do that. But I think it's super important just to reiterate that you need to take the time to interview your audience, your customers, see how they're searching and identify, are they searching in the ways that you expect? And if not, is your content being served up to them? It's like people are missing that right now and things are changing very rapidly. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. I mean, definitely alignment, the intent, understanding the intent, and then making sure, like you say, the content that you have on your site matches that same intent, because otherwise it's not going to be picked up and it's just a waste of time. So yeah, awesome. I'm sure we could talk about this a lot, but I'll call it a day now. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me again, Garrett. And I say all the links will be in the description, so people should definitely read that. And any questions, then obviously head over to LinkedIn and I'm sure Garrett will answer them when he has time. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's really a pleasure. I can't wait to do more of these and watch Sean's other interviews, because you just get smarter, like the Jono interview. Like, people got to watch you, man. You're doing a great job. Thank you for having me.
Cheers, man.